Hey y'all, it's freeze cracked. I'm making video. Okay, so today, if you're wanting to see me do a bunch of cool stuff on this video, you won't, because it's going to be just instructional talking and showing about fluting. And the reason is because I'm constantly depressed when I think about all the preforms, the excellent preforms out there in life that don't get to live to a ripe old age because they're subjected to fluting attempts. And so I thought I would go over some of that in an effort to hopefully increase the success percentage or decrease the failure percentage or whatever. And it's also because it's a holiday weekend and it's kind of quiet and not terrible. And it's getting oppressive with the heat and dust and particulates and stuff. So anyway, oh, and to take my mind off an incident that occurred yesterday. There was this incident yesterday in which I was, wait, where is it? Oh, yeah, see that? Yeah, that, and that, yeah. Okay, well, that had nothing to do with flint napping. Had everything to do with Moitz, and I was attempting to rescue him while he was freaking out from a situation. And anyway, so you do what you got to do. Okay, so fluting. The first thing that I wanted to suggest is don't flute stuff that isn't right to flute. You know, just say no. Yes, I realize you may be an inherent gambler at heart and not have a casino located in your backyard or in your town or whatever, but gambling with a good preform is something that should be done with some degree of chance of success. So, someone gave me, you know, a rock. People, okay, everyone out there who's ever considered giving me rock, just don't. None of y'all have given me rocks that you didn't think would be a good show. Let's see what freeze crack can get out of this. So, anyway, but here's one from my most recent road trip. Okay, so, you know, the whole thing here was, yeah, see what you can get out of this. You know, I know one time Redfern had a rock like this and he made a snake out of it. Well, first of all, I doubt sincerely that he had a rock like this. And secondly, I'm not Redfern. So there you go. At any rate, your chances of successfully making the longest fluted point ever out of this rock are approximating a negative number, okay? So just say no. Golly. All right, so along similar lines, though, you might be more tempted to attempt to flute this rock. But again, just say no. All right, so there's the show and tell. Well, actually, I do have another thing to show you. I was going to show you this because this came out of my rock pile and I found it amusing. This appears to be an attempt at an Adena out of novaculite, and I have suspicions as to where I got it, but I'm not sure. I'm relatively certain I didn't do it, but then again, who knows what has been back in my rock pile for how long and everything. Okay, the first thing, I'm going to talk about fluting. All right, first of all, basics. I have theories. You know that if you've been watching my channel. My theories, I think, are based in many cases upon sound theorying, but I'm not a scientist. At any rate, one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't realize is, you know, you hear people talking about, well, I broke it because I put bending forces on it. Well, what does that mean? All right, here's what I think it means and why it's relevant to you if you're fluting. Obviously, if you attempt to bend a platform or a preform, it'll break if you put enough force on it. That's common sense. So I think in some cases people believe that they bent things enough that it just snapped or failed. That's not an accurate portrayal of what's happening in my opinion. Okay, first of all, you know about end snap. When you hit on here, bang, 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 bam, falls in half. When it falls in half, you get straight across break, basically. It looks like, you know, you took a cracker or something, just snapped it, just boom. Except a cracker, you know, puts off all the little cracker bits, which, okay, so much for that analogy. At any rate, all right, here. When we talk about bending forces, this is why I want you to think about this some. If you're using, say, a Solberger jig, where's my other bit? Oh. I have two bits that I made for my Solberger, neither one of which are optimal at all. Both of which I'm going to show you and tell you some of the non-optimalnesses, and then you go make an optimal one, and you'll flute way better than I ever did, and yay me. Of course, you won't give me credit, I know how you are, but no. All right, look, when you have a jig, you know, like a Solberger, you have a bit that comes out, and it comes out to grab onto the platform. So both of these things do that. You therefore have like a neck on this thing, and there's a depth to that. Well, here's what I want you to think about. It is extremely difficult to create a system, either with a jig or with your own freehanding it or indirect punching it or whatever. It's extremely difficult to create a system where your force is straight along the plane of the point. Straight along it. Anything that isn't straight along it, to a degree, even if it's a very slight degree, is pulling on it one way or the other. So, here's the issue. Whether it's the neck on your thing, let me see if I can draw sideways here. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna draw sideways. Okay, so there's your preform, vertical. It's bipolared. It's on a surface on the point, and you've got, say we're talking Solberger. You've got a bit pulling down on it, right like that, right? Well, you're levering, you got a lever here, and you're pulling outward. Unless you're holding that bit inward somehow with exactly the right amount of force that it's trying to pull outward slightly as you lever the bit, then you're putting outward force on it. Why do we care? Here's why you care. Here's your biface. When you pull outward force on that, and it's bipolar down here and you've got the ears on there, what you're doing is that outward force tends to cause compression along this face. You know, even if it isn't bending it per se, which, you know, with brittle rock, it doesn't bend a whole lot before it breaks. Even if it isn't really bending it and you're not going to break it, you are putting compression on that surface as compared to this surface. What have I said before about when you push on a surface? It sinks the flakes. So if you had the outward force vector, if there's any, it creates compression along here, and I believe that that's where all these reversals go. That's where the reversals occur, where it moves away from that point of pressure, seeks the path of least resistance, reverse hinges, and you get two pieces. Now, that's one of the possibilities. The other thing is, I don't know why, but some people believe in putting lots of pressure on top of the arms on their jigs. They'll sit on them, they'll put a lot of weight on it or whatever. I understand not wanting your arms to bounce or anything like that at the point of release or whatever. But if you put a bunch of weight down on this, so you've got a bunch of weight down on this, if you get a full-length flute and you put a bunch of weight down on it, you then create a knife edge here with a bunch of weight crunching down on it. Another key variable in potentially getting bending things that cause reversals is what happens to the point of your preform at the time that the flake goes. It goes, it runs off the end. You now have an irregular knife edge here with pressure coming down on it. I think some people's work is breaking at that point when it comes down unevenly and then puts pressure outward or inward depending upon the shape of this as it crunches down. It's a knife edge, it's probably going to crunch, or even if it doesn't crunch, it's not perfectly square and supported, or not square, but perfectly rounded off and supported. Speaking of rounding off, when you grind the tip a little bit to keep it from being too sharp on your anvil material, which we need to talk about too, and when you grind the top of your fluting platform, your nipple, you want to create a situation where the force that's being put on this is even, that it puts the force on like one point that's rounded off to where you're not getting unusual force. Okay, so why am I saying that? Well, we're going to look at the end here. This is a top view of your preform. So center line, and say you've read and studied and thought, and you believe that the ideal point is to put your contact area on your fluting platform halfway between the imaginary center line and the face, and that's where you want to put your pressure. Okay. If you make that a flat-topped platform like this, where is your pressure going to be when you put that bit on it? The answer is, you don't know. I try and create a rounded or slightly domed top to my platforms and then make it, grind it smooth as possible with the finest abrader possible, almost polishing it. The reason is that's the one thing I don't want to fail, and I want to try and position the pressure precisely as possible where I want it to be. So if it's flat or wide, if you make a platform that's shaped like a screwdriver, flathead screwdriver along here, which a lot of people do that, the problem with that is when you get your bit on it, where exactly is the bit pushing? Is it pushing on this side, on that side? What are the odds that you've got your mating between the bit and the top of your platform perfectly level to where it pushes even on both sides? Well, if it doesn't push even on both sides, and the pressure is not where you think it's going to be, and it can start releasing on that side first, which creates like a torquing motion that can twist it off from one side or the other side in a manner that'll probably cost you an ear. And once the ear fails, then usually that introduces uneven pressure and stuff in the preform that ends up breaking the preform too. A lot of times the ear will blow up in the preform. Along the same lines, well, not along the same lines. Let me think if I want to say anything else about that. I'll just go with that for a moment. Okay, so enough about, contours on your preform. If you got a low spot, fix it or don't flute it. Okay? You know, if you got a low spot up at the front, you know, and you're just going to do a Clovis flute, and you know enough how to put enough pressure on it to just run that flute 2 inches or whatever you think is appropriate, okay, that's fine. You know, there's a lot of points like that. But along those lines, so many people put way too much force on jigged points. And the points look extraordinarily jigged because when you have a flute channel, even with your side flakes on the preform, like normally, we'll get this marvelous Adina out here. Normally, you know, you've got all these side flakes where you're making your preform. And then when you flute, if a flute is run with a normal level of pressure, like something that you did either by hitting it or whatever, it it will attempt to change the way that it runs based on the contours alongside it. So like when it comes to a low spot, it'll start running wider and sink a little bit and then come back up if it hadn't already failed by cutting through to the path of least resistance, try and come back up. So you get rippling to a degree along here. The slower the flake is running, the more it will be influenced by these side flakes. And so, number one, that's kind of a lesson to make sure your side flakes are as even as possible and your contours are as biconvex as possible, but slight biconvexity, not a bunch. But also, it's going to be influenced more. So, a natural, normal, hand fluted kind of thing, or even with indirect or any kind of percussion or whatever, is going to be less perfectly smooth and look like it was machined on a router or mill than something that has 100 pounds of pressure or something like that on a Solberger. The problem with that is all we're doing is trying to take a flute off the end instead of the sides. If you've worked any big rock, you've taken all kinds of ginormous flakes off the sides of all kinds of work with way less force than is being used a lot of times on these flutes. So what am I arguing about or advocating? Can you please consider using whatever force is necessary? This is like, law enforcement 101. Use only that force necessary to affect the desired result. We're not talking about arresting your preforms. We're talking about, not breaking them. If you need 20 pounds or 30 pounds, figure it out. If you work the same kind of materials all the time, over time you'll have in your mind what's needed. So then, once you figure out how much pressure needs to be put on the lever, etc., don't put a bunch more. Either figure out how to build platforms that let go at the right time, which is really hard to do, to get it always where it lets go, with your isolation and stuff, always where it lets go at the right time, without failing early and without having to, almost herniate yourself trying to make it go. Or figure out a good way to initiate the flake at the moment you wish it to, when you feel that the pressure is correct, without putting a lot of outward force on it. Okay, so having said all that, I have seen someone hold the thing, pinch between the thumb and forefinger, and at the right, when they feel the pressure's right, just simply move it outward with their thumb, but keeping the forefinger on it to where it doesn't fly outward. I've seen that. I have myself done that. I've also tapped. It doesn't take much. The flake initiates really quickly with just a tiny tap on the bit with like a little bopper. So you can keep a little bopper nearby, and as you're putting pressure, you can just tap. The problem with that is you've only got two hands. So if one hand's on the lever and the other hand is on the bopper, then when you tap this, nothing is keeping that from flying out. Well, when it flies out, it's not only putting the strong compressive force along that face, but it's also changing the angle dramatically to where if the flake breaks and it's still got push on it, it kicks inward. So it can hinge badly or shock it so bad that it'll break. So, have you heard of rubber bands? Consider that if you were to, on your preform here, if you were to take and put a rubber band along the bit near the base or top end of the preform or something, then that bit, if the rubber band is exactly the right amount of slight pull back or something, that bit can't fly out completely and won't fly out for very long. So there's those kinds of thoughts. An additional thought is, what if you were to take athletic tape or blue masking tape or whatever and put a very thin strip of it gently along the face of you preform along its run. The possibility is there that if you did that, then if your flake does break as it's running, instead of pooching out and dying and maybe kicking into a hinge, that the butted ends would stay together, and you might have 3 or 4 breaks along here, but it continues to push. If the butted ends don't blow up where it's like dust from the 150 pounds of pressure that was on the bit, there's a possibility that it all might stay together, stuck to that tape slightly, and run the way you wanted it to run instead of, you know, getting a partial run. So those are just some thoughts there. I know I'm running long on this. I'm verbose today. But anyway, want to talk about a couple of things. I don't have optimal systems, but I have gotten them to work. I think you know, what you ideally want to do is you want to, where am I? Where are you? Ideally, you want to grab at the top and you want to anvil the tip, and that's it, nothing else. The grabbing just simply keeps the thing straight up and down on the anvil and puts no other forces on it. So, the width of your arms here is an issue because really I think the more I have thought about fluting and do that kind of stuff, the more I would like thinner arms, because if you can achieve not pulling outward on the thing much, that would really help. But all you're doing is really clamping it and holding it together, and it doesn't take that tall an arm to do that. The reason is because, again, if you get support along the down somewhere in the middle of the point as opposed to just up by the ears, if there is outward force, and that support becomes a pivot point, if you will, or fulcrum type thing to snap it, it just puts force along it that isn't needed for the purpose of fluting. So when I do stuff with my indirect, I'm just barely grabbing up by the ears with my fingers and pinching up there, and not putting anything along it other than jamming the point into my leg. Okay. Along that same thing, talking about stuff here, I didn't do near enough adjustments. I think these should all be way closer together, because optimally you'd like to get, you know, your bar pretty even with whatever height points that you have. On the bits, I really kind of think that this bit was an idea I had. I just make a steel base and just use reusable copper, because I didn't need the whole thing be copper. I don't think this was a good idea. And on this bit, I thought, well, I didn't want to really, I used very thick copper because I was thinking, oh, well, I don't want it to deform as much and have to refile it each time as much and stuff. And if it was thicker, it would be sturdier and everything. I don't think that's a good idea either. One of the reasons on both is both of these things don't flex much, and they have mass. Well, this one has more mass, and I don't think those characteristics are good for fluting, because I also think that wooden arms, your levers, I think the degree to which you can get the leather where it's strong enough up here to not break at the point that you've got the nail or pin running through it into your bit, that's important. But then I think the lever itself, if it could be a little thinner and flex a little more, might be a good thing, because again, it's like loading up like a bow type thing. If you create the pressure with follow through to where when the thing releases, there's a little bit of run behind it by virtue of a little bit lighter flex and more flexible in the bit, and a little bit flex in there, that can't be a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. That's just me thinking. I mentioned before, but I showed you the bit arms with no padding. I do believe in padding them. I just was lazy and didn't cut padding and glue it in there, but I just wrapped the top of the Preform if you watched my stuff before. On your anvils, it's just a little copper anvil. Some people use antler. I have used wood. The problem with wood is if your Preform pushes down into the wood too much because it's kind of sharp, then that could be an uneven force on it depending upon how it buries itself in the wood as you're putting pressure on it, and could keep it from doing the right thing more. And then also, of course, if you flute off the tip and then you got a sharp edge going down in there, who knows what that'll do. But that's true on any anvil material. Anyway, I suggest you try different anvil materials and see what you think. I mean, I think I've heard of somebody using cutting board material, you know, phenolic resin or whatever it is. Antler, copper, wood, different stuff. Try and see what you think. Okay, I'm going to very quickly mention Guillotine jigs. Okay, so this is a Guillotine jig that I can't get completely in frame, but anyway, basically you've got vertical bars with a pivot cross point thing there, and you need some sort of an adjustable platform configuration to try and optimize it's really critical that you optimize where the lever goes on this thing. The closer you can put the joint adjustments together, the better, because you don't have the bi-directional kind of ability that you do with the Solberger. It's strictly trying to get that lever. This is the lever that came with this jig. I thought it's cute. I haven't used this thing really. I just want to have it. I don't know why I end up collecting stuff. I need to use it more. At any rate, I think that it becomes more critical with this kind of jig to have a flat bar type engagement, but you can put a longer lever, like you could take an Ishii stick punch type thing and get your flat lever, but getting this thing where it needs to be to where when you start applying the pressure straight down is really critical, because even though there's some leather padding on the front of this, when you start levering into it, if you're the slightest bit high, well, if you're low, it's going to be putting push out kind of force on your Preform, depending upon how you're holding up against there. Which holding up against there is an issue too, because again, you're putting the pressure on the face. I remember seeing a video, I think by Jim Wynn, where he had rubber bands all across the face of something he was fluting. But at any rate, the way in which it's held up against the thing when you don't have those crossbars of a Solberger is a variable that's a problem, because any pressure along that front is very dangerous. But then the other side of it is if your lever is a little bit high, then when you start to pull downward, it's pulling the top of the Preform into this top area and real easy to break off the ears. So I know some genius type people that are great at fluting Folsoms and stuff that do things with a straight lever jig, I mean the straight guillotine type jig, and get good results. I don't know what their percentage of success rate is. But at any rate, I prefer Solberger, but I know that it can be done well with the other thing. It can be done a lot of different ways. A key thing is don't overdo this stuff as far as mentally believing that fluting and taking a flake off the end of something is rocket science, because you take flakes all the time, and the fact that you break things more often when you take them off the end is strictly, in large part, a result of support issues and or not understanding things. Like, for instance, when I'm talking about outward force, if you set your platform too close to the center line, well, guess what? There's no way that I'm aware of to push a flake straight through the middle of a preform for 3, 4, 5 inches without breaking it. So there's also no way in my understanding to even initiate a lot of those kind of flakes without putting too much outward force on it because it's set too high. So you're doomed, your preform is doomed if you put the platform in the wrong place to start with. Yeah, I know you don't want a skimmer super thin flake, but at least with those you can reflake your convexity back and try again. If you set that thing too high, then it really is extremely risky. Now, I do get away with that kind of stuff sometimes with what I do, but it's never a good idea. It's always more risky than if I did it right. But the way that I get away with it is I initiate the flake rapidly. I don't use too big and too heavy and too slow a percussor. And I always have something counteracting the outward force in the form of a small piece of leather that I'm pinching or something that keeps that thing from coming outward. So number one, I'm making it go quick to where it doesn't build up a bunch of compressive force. If you don't have it isolated enough, it's going to fail if you set that platform high. And I'm counteracting the downward force component almost instantaneously after the flake gets that peeling initiation, before it has time to act on the whole thing and cause a major catastrophe. So anyway, sorry that this took so long. I did not mean to talk this long, but oh well. So that's what I'm going to say about fluting. By the way, what I did the last time I fluted was I took this Solberger. I put a board across the bottom of it on my tailgate of my truck. I put 2 buckets of rock, one on each side of the board. So now the Solberger's held down to the bucket of my truck by like 100 pounds. Okay, so then I put the preform in the Solberger, and I shouldn't say this, I think I put a small bucket of rocks on top of the, very small. I put a small bucket of rocks on top of the arms just to support it, but I wish I had a sandbag or something, should have done that. So then, when I put my freeform in there and got the bit on and I got everything set up perfectly, I took a rubber band and I went from this bolt around to that bolt, just holding the bit on the preform, and I made sure that I tied a couple of rubber bands together and got it loose enough to where I thought it would keep it from going out and get it to come back quickly, but it wouldn't hold it, wouldn't put much pressure on it. So that left my hands free, and what I did was I used my left hand on the lever and put the right amount of pressure on it, and then I just tapped the bit with something on my right hand and got a really nice fluted point. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry it took so long. Bye.